Good afternoon, everybody. I spoke to Ross this morning. Unfortunately, he sounded a little bit like Darth Vader after a tracheotomy. He sends his apologies, but he's feeling a bit ill. So as Bruce said, my name's Edward Taylor. I'm the technical lead for corporate travel at Skyscanner. I started out as a graduate aerospace engineer at a company called Thales. I then became a web developer. I then started up Doorside Travel, which is a corporate travel tool here in Edinburgh with Ross McNairn. And then we went on to sell that to Skyscanner. So what I want to do today is kind of go through three major transitions that we went through, three major phases that kind of allowed all of this to happen in a 2-year space. Starting with the transition from aerospace engineer to developer. So early on, kind of Ross and I decided that we really wanted to start a company. We got together a bit of money, we got an idea, we found some developers, and we thought magic was just going to kind of happen. And it was a total catastrophe. So I gave this developer a 30-page kind of defense procurement document style. He had no idea what to do, and the whole thing fell apart. And we kind of realized that we really had absolutely no idea what we were doing. We had no idea about the technologies that we were trying to use. We had no idea about the domain that we were going into. And we had no idea about the kind of the startup process and how to actually effectively start a company. So we realized that the idea really didn't matter. It wasn't important. What was important was we got ourselves into a position where we could execute on an idea. So we kind of got obsessed with an ability to execute. And we did this in a number of ways. So firstly, coding. I know for a lot of people in here, they'll see engineer to developer and they'll think there's not that big a transition. Ross's original slide read lawyer to developer. So I don't think anybody in this room can't pick up coding as a skill. And we started to do this in our free time and our weekends, kind of whilst we were in our previous jobs. We started to read everything. So anything that we were doing, somebody's already gone through it, and we started to become religious about reading into the domain, reading into startups. And finally, a big leap of faith. So, we made the decision that pushing to production, coding, and getting to an ability to execute was actually more important than getting paid. So we both immediately just decided to kind of flippantly quit our jobs to the happiness of both our sets of parents, go and live extremely cheaply on the savings that we had, and go and become kind of web developers to get a grip of the technology and get a grip of the domain. So the information was all free, and we acknowledged that that attention to developing that ability was pretty expensive. We sacrificed a year of earnings at what we were previously earning, starting out with free contracts, moving on to slightly better paid web development contracts, just getting ourselves to a position where we could actually kind of see an idea through to completion. And just to note, we quit without an idea in our mind. We literally just had the idea of developing that ability. So that went on for about a year. And during that time, we had one or two little ideas that we tried kind of on the side. Nothing that really took off. And this kind of came to our next realization, and a realization we had to go through another transition, which was going from being a web developer to actually starting a company. So where we'd tried ideas, we'd been doing them doing them part-time, doing them at our weekends, and we really kind of weren't getting in, we weren't properly executing on those ideas. We realized that we had to immerse ourselves in the business domain that we were looking at, and completely devote ourselves to just executing now that we'd developed the ability to execute. And number one was no distractions. So we both quit our jobs. We had savings, and we kind of acknowledged, again, a second leap of faith. We acknowledged that we were going to put all our savings into just funding ourselves for a while, knowing that after a year or so, we may end up penniless and jobless. But that was just kind of a leap of faith we had to make. We also initially wanted to look at trying to avoid investment. Because again, that's something that can take up time. And at that very, very early stage in kind of product definition We just wanted to be kind of left to our own devices. And what that allowed, and what we'd kind of developed ourselves to be able to do, was constantly iterate on our idea. And I say idea loosely because actually what we did, and I know a question on a lot of people's minds when they look at trying to do something like this, is how do you know that the idea you're immersing yourself in is the right one? Well, we actually picked, more than an idea, we picked a value. So if people are thinking of starting something, you have to be very honest and aggressive, and very specific about the value that you're going to be giving. If you look at Uber, 30% reduction in price of taxis. Skyscanner saves you hours because we searched 1,200 sites for you. These are very finite values. And for us, it was to give free managed corporate travel to companies and to cut travel management costs by 20%. And I think anybody in here who's had to kind of deal with the finance of corporate travel in a company, would look at that and think, yeah, it's a difficult proposition to say no to. As soon as you've got that value, then it's just a case of executing on that value. And that's exactly what we did. So the second year, kind of living in a cheap flat down in Leith, living pretty much on tuna, we went through several ideas, sticking to that core value, to trying to just achieve that core value, and about 15 different versions of our system, very rapidly iterating. And by the end of the year, Skyscanner had actually adopted our tool to handle their own travel. Slight irony to that. So then came the third transition. So we kind of built this tool, it was starting to take off. And then we ended up selling it on to Skyscanner, who kind of brought us on board to run it internally as a corporate travel tool for Skyscanner. And I know a lot of people in the room will be thinking, why when we had a successful model, why did we decide to sell it at that point? So what I've written there, so the right company, firstly. I think if people find themselves in that position, you really have to do your due diligence on that company and make sure that the situation you're entering is the right one for you. We wanted to maintain our autonomy. We wanted to see our product through to fruition. We still do it, still ongoing. We kind of wanted to disrupt corporate travel. And they laid out a system that really worked for us. We're still running what's now a team of 20 internally, as almost a small company inside a big company. We've got their distribution platform, and it kind of opened up a door to become globally relevant. You can either be a small part of something extremely large, or a large part of something medium to small, and we opted for the former. And the right time too. So earlier I was talking about distractions, and they were starting to kind of creep in. We'd started to care more about seeing this product work than we did about kind of say any financial gains that we were looking at. And we were starting to have to deal with accountants, lawyers, recruitment, offices. We kind of wanted to offload that and just focus on product. So that's kind of what brought us in. And the result, I can definitively say, after a year inside Skyscanner, after a year running this, has been an acceleration in the product. And more surprisingly, an acceleration in our individual development. So one of the biggest things we worried about before we went in was that if we went into a large company, do we become a small cog? Am I back in that aerospace engineering company just as an engineer at a level? And I can say that the absolute opposite happened. We're now inside, so doors, for one, doors are being opened that would never have been opened. I've spoken to Uber, Facebook, large tech companies that would never have opened their door to Dorsai. I've chatted the product through with people like Mike Moritz. The access is just crazy. And in terms of mentorship, so we've got a board that have all seen success with their own respective companies. And really when you're coming to make these decisions, you have to look at who, not just the situation you're going into and the kind of the financial incentives to do it, but also the people that you're going to be working alongside and what they can offer you to make sure that personal development kind of continues through. So that's a very quick run through what is, you can imagine, it's been quite a long 2 years for us. Has anybody got any questions? Okay, cool.
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to know what your goal is now. Like, obviously, things are going great for you, and they have done in the last 2 years, but what is now the goal that you've got?
Is that a personal goal or a
business? Yeah.
Personal.
Business.
Oh, business. Okay. So so right now the business goal is to effectively release what has been a product that's now been developed in Skyscanner's image. The first step is to get that released and then use Skyscanner. So Skyscanner gets about 40 million unique people kind of going through, which is an awesome distribution platform. So it's working out how we kind of tap into that and get access to a lot more companies and get this system into a lot more companies. So that's really the short term, yeah. I think there's another question over there, yeah.
Hi, I just wondered when you mentioned the disruption part and how you decided on that, what it was that you were sort of trying to create as part of that disruption, or how did you identify that within quite a busy corporate market, I suppose?
I guess it was, we were looking around, and with some of the contract work that we'd done, we just noticed, through that year that universally there was one thing that was complained about, which was kind of corporate travel. And even a brief skim of the market, you just see that the margins that corporate travel companies are kind of putting on the management of travel, largely through inefficiencies. And I think when it comes to kind of disruption and using technology for disruption, you find if you take something back to the base requirement, add technology, that tends to be where you find that you can just, that's when disruption happens, I think, taking something back to its base need and applying technology.
Hi there. I'm a part of a tech startup. We're making a website, and I was wondering if you could share with us what are some major hurdles when starting a website company?
Some major hurdles. Oof, tricky one.
Maybe if you could share some insight on what to avoid or what to watch out for.
For me, number one, so actually early on, and on some of the earlier projects, we brought on people who were kind of trying to build Google from the off, right? They were worrying about a system that's going to scale to serve 20 million people, and what we found, when I talk about 15 different versions of something coming out, in a very short space, I think the biggest danger that we hit early and then avoided was trying to plan our architecture to scale too early on, when actually what happened with Dorsai, if you plan for something to be just good enough, and you kind of have to get that balance of just good enough to prove that concept. If you prove a product market fit in anything, I can assure you somebody's going to come in with money, or you will be able to get the resource to restructure something. So I guess my advice would be not to worry about scaling, not to worry about a lot of the concerns that large companies, and when you bring on people, be wary of people that come from large companies and try and kind of instill large company thinking on a very early stage company.
Thank you.
Cool.
I've got a question. So from both your story and I've spoken to Ross about this as well, is that neither of you have got like a coding background, but then you managed to learn it and then build this. To some of the young people in the audience, what would you say? Do you think that's really important that young people are learning to code? And if so, how did you go about learning?
So for number one, I certainly agree, and I wouldn't just say young people as well. I genuinely think coding, not to sound too melodramatic, but technology is almost another kind of revolution in terms of industry. And so even if, no matter what industry you want to go into, it doesn't have to be a kind of a web company. Technology is going to be kind of integral to any startup, especially any startup that's looking at kind of boosting efficiencies in industries. In terms of how to take that on, so the resources online are pretty unbelievable right now. There are courses, so Harvard's kind of opened up all its computing courses. They're all open source and online and easily accessible. I would start, I think the key is finding a technology that gives you something as early as possible. And by that I mean if you look at languages like Ruby and Ruby on Rails, anybody in this room could type in 3 lines in these kind of frameworks and these languages and achieve a result, have a to-do list or have something. And as soon as you kind of get an early result, it kind of inspires a continuation of learning. Where if you try and learn something kind of from the base and spend months before you see anything come out of it, you're going to kind of lose momentum. So that would be my suggestion. And specifically Code School. Don't worry, it's not mine after saying that. That's where I learned. So to start with, a really good resource for learning how to start something up.
Do you think we should be doing more in schools to encourage people from, even if it's primary school level through high school, just as part of the curriculum?
Yeah, I'd definitely agree with that. I think if you look at America, that's exactly what they're doing. If you look at the university signups in America, there's been a huge swathe away from the kind of, your MBAs, legal degrees, accounting degrees, into technology. And, their kind of junior education is matching that requirement for kind of expertise. And I definitely agree that I think schools, I know that they are, I think they are starting to bring in computing.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there any final questions from anyone? Oh, there's a couple. I think Josh has got a question in the back.
So when you first started, you had quite a close-knit team. How was that transition into Skyscanner where now you're part of a team of 20? How did that work for you? This was initially your product. How did relinquishing some control of that and delegation, how did that play out for you?
It's a really good question. So that was one of the, because the acceleration, so in a year's space we went from kind of 2 to 20. And if anyone's ever read the leadership pipeline, and you start to look at how you have to kind of scale management, it's actually one of the examples of rapid development that I was talking about inside the company. Initially very difficult. You go from suddenly managing yourself as an individual contributor to managing people, and then managing managers. And each change is a huge change you have to undergo. But internally in a company, it's just another advantage, is that you have a kind of a support network of people who've already done it. Where externally, I think you find a lot of startups find themselves in a bit of a kind of mess. They don't have that mentorship about things like process to the same extent. So yeah, it was a challenge.
Thank you.
Cool.
I think there was another question over this way.
You mentioned earlier on that you iterated quite a lot in your early product. I was just wondering, all those product decisions you made, what sort of quantity of those were done by quantitative metrics, and what was done by a gut feeling of when you knew you had to change something in your product or add to it?
So early on, it was difficult with the kind of the magnitude, especially with a tool like this. It was difficult to kind of get the numbers to have statistically significant metrics. We used tools like Mixpanel to kind of track user flows, to track funnels. But largely, decisions came out of interacting really closely with the customers. So we were talking with our customers every day. We had, be it going and meeting the companies, be it chatting to them on chat. And out of that, it was kind of just quick decisions based on trying to, I guess, a gut instinct that came out of just seeing a general pattern of user feedback.
I've got one last question. So when you started Dorsai, you were working that for about a year or so? Is that
Just under, yeah.
Yeah. So in that period, you're complete in startup zone. What's it like going from being in a startup, getting a taste for that lifestyle, and then now being part of a much bigger company?
So I guess, actually Ross and I were discussing this kind of the other day, is, where was the pressure? Because beforehand, your pressure, your boss is your money. It's kind of like the bottom line. And if you don't succeed, then, you're going to kind of end up eating less than tuna. And now we're inside, we've got a board with expectations. I'd say the pressure has actually stayed similar. So it's not, we haven't seen a big kind of drop off in that. In terms of lifestyle, though, I'd say it's structure that's been kind of added. So the startup, we were never sure. There was always the kind of paranoia of measurement, and coming in, an addition of kind of more experienced structure has meant that we've kind of, it's definitely kind of more, I'd say more relaxed in having faith in what we're doing. Where when you're in startup, when you're in the wilderness, you kind of, you kind of have to back your own decisions.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Ed.
Cool, thanks.